Precepts incense, samadhi incense, wisdom incense, liberation incense, liberation of views incense, cloud of lighted incense, pouring into the Dharma realms, offering to the highest teachers of the 10 directions. I respectfully bow to the incense cloud Bodhisattva. I respectfully bow to the incense cloud Bodhisattva. I respectfully bow to the incense cloud Bodhisattva. I respectfully bow to all directions of space, all realms, past, present, and future, all Buddhas, the honored Dharma, the enlightened Sangha, the permanent three treasures. I respectfully bow to our own teacher, Sakyamuni Buddha, the future born Maitreya Buddha, great wisdom, Manjushri Bodhisattva, great practice, Samantabhadra Bodhisattva, Dharma protector Bodhisattvas, Buddhas and Bodhisattvas assembled at the great holy mountain. I respectfully bow to the great love, great compassion, Amitabha Buddha of the Western Paradise, great compassion, Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva, great vow, Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva, great power, Mahastamapada Bodhisattva, all the Bodhisattvas in the great pure ocean. Well, good morning. Nice to see you here. Before I start, I'll mention, I think I put it in the chat too, but the plan at present is for services to resume at White Sands next week. I'm working on whether or not and how we can get those live streamed, at least the Dharma talks. But I'm not in charge of everything, so I'm not 100% sure how that's going to work out, or if it's going to work out. But I'm working on it. And worst case, I'll videotape the Dharma talks, and when I get home from services, so in the middle of the afternoon, I'll edit them down real quick and put them up on YouTube. So subscribe to this channel, please, and then you'll know what's happening. And also, like the videos. Assuming you like them, it's a small thing, but click like. And YouTube, they have this thing where a lot of subscriptions, a lot of likes get more attention and stuff like that. And that can't hurt us, help us get the Dharma to more people and let more people know what we're up to. So anyway, on to the good stuff. So I talked a little earlier when I was starting out, I don't know, a couple months ago, one of these online talks. I talked a little bit earlier about the concept of divinity. The quality of being divine, having some sort of divine aspect. And then last week I talked about the Kalama Sutta, which is where the Buddha talks about what's true and what you should rely on as a spiritual teaching. And in the first part of that discourse, the Buddha talks about things that are basically not divine, like what leads to harm, what leads to suffering in oneself and others. And so just to remind you, he said that when you realize states of mind like delusion and greed and anger, and you realize that those lead to harm for yourself and others, then you should put aside those states of mind. So I want to come back a little bit to this idea of the divine and what that means in Buddhism and kind of how this shows up in the second part of the Kalama Sutta. So what does this word mean, divine? It's not really something that you encounter a lot in Buddhism, but, I think in the West, we think about divinity and being in touch with something that's divine, that's beyond this existence and beyond, this little form, and connects us to other things. So the dictionary defines divine as being of, from, or like a god. So now we have this other question, which is, I think, a more difficult one. What do we mean when we say a God? So first off, I don't know the answer to this question. And not only do I not know it, I don't want to know it. I hope to continue to not know. In my experience, someone who claims to know the answer to a question like that, to know what God is, probably isn't really thinking very hard about the question, even. So, the Buddha said that in the search for truth, for the divine, he was talking. I should back up a little bit and give just a brief context for this and what the Kalama Sutta is and why I'm talking about this. So the Kalamas, in case you weren't here last time, were a clan of people in India, and they had heard that the Buddha was staying near town, near their village, and they had been confused by spiritual teachings they had gotten from other teachers. And so they had gone to the Buddha. They had heard that the Buddha, was enlightened and that he was, knew great things. And so they went to him and said, okay, so how do we know what's true and what's not true? We get these different points of view from different people, and they contradict each other. So how do we know what to follow, basically? What's useful? And the Buddha said that, when you're looking for what's true, what's divine, what's godly, and so on, not to go by tradition, not to go by what you're told by some teacher or preacher or whatever. In other words, don't rely on something just because it's dogma or some authority figure says you should believe it or it appears in some book of scripture or whatever. He says instead you should see truth for yourself. So traditions can be very helpful, and it's important to have access to a good teacher or teachers. But it also seems to me that the more dogmatic and moralistic somebody is, the less likely they are to have experienced anything you might call divine. Our vision is easily clouded by delusion, by greed, and by aversion, hatred, and so on. And so if we start to cling too much to dogma, to what we think divine is and how we define it and that sort of thing, then that becomes another delusion in itself. Well, we believe this, and so that's what you have to believe. And that's kind of what he was talking about. So, and this idea is not unique to Buddhism. There are some Christian theologians who have very similar insights about that. So Thomas Merton, for example, was a Trappist monk, and he's considered by a lot of people one of the most important Catholic authors of the 20th century. He died in the 1960s, but before his death, he got very interested in meditation and kind of initiated this dialogue between Buddhism and Christianity. And along the way, he got to know a famous Thai monk, Buddhadasa Bhikkhu, and the Dalai Lama and Thich Nhat Hanh. And so to him, the question of the divine was a lot more important than the answer. He said, there is only one problem on which all my existence, my peace and happiness depend, to discover myself in discovering God. If I find God, I will find myself, and if I find my true self, I will find God. He doesn't say I found God and here's what it is. He says the one problem on which all my existence and happiness and peace depend is to discover myself in discovering God. So we seek ourselves in seeking the divine, right? We find ourselves really in this being open to what it means to experience the divine. So another teacher that I've admired quite a bit, a retired Episcopalian bishop, John Shelby Spunk, is another influential Christian thinker. And he once said that he doesn't believe in God, at least not in the usual way. He said the questions of God's existence is unanswerable because existence itself is and God can't be found in such human constructs. If you were around when I talked about the Lotus Sutra, or if you've watched those videos on YouTube, you'll see that it starts off really trying to get your head out of this idea of conventional existence of space and time, historical time, relative space. He says, I see and experience transcendence everywhere. I see people who have enormous capacities to love. I see relationships that call people into new levels of being. So to ask a question like, does God exist? Or to pretend is to pretend that I can enter the mind of God. So he says, for me, believing in God is about believing in life, believing in love, and even believing in air. I assume the quality of God, and then I seek to walk into the meaning of that assumption. I assume the reality of God, and then I try to walk into the meaning of that assumption. That's a very interesting way of looking at this. He doesn't say, well, I had this divine revelation that God existed, and here's what it is. He says, I take this assumption that there is something that I would consider God, and then I try to enter it into that. So Buddhism sees these things a little differently. We don't talk about God as a path to liberation, we don't say, well, I'm going to find my true self by finding it in God or whatever. But that doesn't mean that we don't recognize the divine. Sometime back, I talked about the three bodies of the Buddha. There's the historical Buddha, the Nirmanakaya. That's the incarnation that appeared at a specific time in conventional time in a specific place in knowable geography, right? And then there's the Sambhogakaya, which is the Buddha field or bliss body that appears to us in sort of saintly form, like Mother Avalokiteshvara or Amitabha Buddha. And then the ultimate expression of the divine is the Dharmakaya, the Buddha nature that pervades the whole universe, including right here and now. And this is the body in which Buddha appears in everywhere and in everything. So this is the inconceivable body of the Buddha that's not limited by time and space. It's inconceivable the way Spong says that God is inconceivable. Remember, he says, I see and experience transcendence everywhere. That's kind of, that sounds very sort of lofty, but there's this Zen saying that once you're enlightened, trees and rocks are also enlightened. And you can kind of experience that, when you look at, when you go to a retreat or something and your mind calms down to the point that you start seeing more clearly, you'll see everything in everything, I guess is a way of putting, I'm not going to be caught. Anyway, so how would we, as Buddhists, do that thing that Spong talks about? Walk into this meaning of the assumption that the divine exists in a state that is from, or like, as the dictionary puts it, for Buddha. In other words, how do you assume Buddha nature and then step into it the way Spong says? So, I've gone a long way from the Buddhist conversation with the Kalamas, but I'm going to get back there. So let's go back to his instructions to the Kalamas. After he talked to them about the need to abandon harmful states of mind like greed and anger and so on, he started talking to them about developing good states. And he says, now Kalamas, one who is a disciple of the noble ones, and thus devoid of greed, devoid of ill will, undiluted, alert, and resolute, pervades the east as well as the west, the north, and the south, with an awareness imbued with goodwill. And then he keeps pervading above, below, and all around, everywhere and in every respect, the all-encompassing cosmos with an awareness imbued with goodwill, abundant, expansive, immeasurable, free from hostility, free from ill will. So I'm using the translation goodwill for a word here that you're all familiar with, probably, metta. He's saying to pervade the four directions with metta. So metta is the first of the Brahma Viharas, and I say you're probably familiar with it because if you show up for these online services on Wednesdays, or if you go to White Sands on Sunday mornings, we chant the Metta Sutta, which is a discourse in which the Buddha says, if you want to be awakened, this is what you should do. You should imbue, just like he says here, imbue with goodwill, with metta, with loving kindness, however you want to describe that, everything in every respect with this state of kindness, of love, of goodwill. So metta is the first of four Brahma Viharas. So Brahma Viharas, which is really referring very directly to the idea of divinity. Brahma in the Indian cosmology is sort of the highest level of gods. And Vihara is a dwelling space. So basically, this is the highest level of godly place you can live. Are these states of mind. So if you want to live if you want to be divine, if you want to live in a divine space, you develop these 4 states of mind. And the first one is this loving kindness, this goodwill. So to dwell in this place, in this state, might be to do what Merton called discovering yourself and discovering the divine, or what Spong called, assuming the reality and stepping into it, right? The Buddha, so the Buddha says that's the first step. If you want to do something that's really true, in the sense of being in touch with divine, do this. And then he says the next thing is he keeps pervading the 4 directions with an awareness imbued with compassion. So the Pali word is karuna. And basically it means the hope that other beings be free from suffering. So we start out wanting them to be happy and well, and then we want them to be free from difficulties, free from oppression, free from misery, and so on. It's with an awareness imbued with appreciation of this word is mudita. I think it's the same word in both Pali and Sanskrit. It doesn't translate real well, but it's sort of gladness in others' good fortune. So it's kind of like gratitude, and gratitude is important too. The gratitude really connects to all of these. So it's not, I think it's not particularly helpful to look at it as a separate state, but as a component in the others. But if you think about, if you have good fortune and you're grateful for that, right? And then someone that you care about has good fortune, you would be grateful for that also, right? And so I think this is kind of a good way of looking at mudita. So it's often translated as gladness, which is very incomplete, or sympathetic joy, which is a little confusing. But basically happiness and others' good fortune. And then he says he keeps pervading the 4 directions and above and below with an awareness imbued with equanimity. So the Pali word there's upeka. Similar in Sanskrit, it's like upeksha or something like that. Anyway, this is, I think a good way of talking about equanimity is acceptance. So it doesn't mean that everything is the same. It doesn't mean that nothing is good and nothing is bad. It means that we can be calm and resilient and return to our state of balance when other bad things happen, whether good things happen. We don't attach to what we perceive as good or push away what we perceive as bad. Doesn't mean we have to like it or go along with it or whatever. Think about it this way. So I have metta for you all. I want you to be happy. I want you to be free from suffering. If one of you emails me and says, "Hey, I got a new job," or some other good thing happened, I'm happy for that because I have goodwill and for you, and so therefore I'm going to be happy for your good fortune. But sometimes bad things happen, right? And so it's not a matter of not caring about that. It's not a matter of being indifferent about that. It's a matter of accepting the reality as it is, and then dealing with it as you can. So it's about calmness and resiliency. If you're on a boat and the boat rocks, the boat will, once the water calms down, it'll be stable again, right? So we can experience difficulties without being swamped. We can recover from upsets. And this really comes from accepting where you are. The first step in dealing with a difficult situation is to accept that this is what's going on. As long as you're in denial about it or pushing it away or whatever, you can't really work with it very well. So it's non-attachment, but non-attachment is not detachment. It's accepting, right? So the results of developing this, the Buddha said, is that one who is a disciple of the noble ones. In other words, one who's a follower of anyone who's purified and enlightened, not necessarily a Buddhist. When he says a disciple of the noble ones, he means follower of a teacher who really is enlightened. His mind free from hostility, free from ill will, undefiled and pure, acquires four assurances in the here and now. So again, remember, they had come and said, how do we know what's true? And part of the issue was that there were people who taught that everything was basically preordained by past karma. You know, if you've done something bad in the past, you're going to experience, you know, whatever you did in this life was predetermined by that. So there's this sort of predestination view of karma. There was a view of karma that it didn't matter, that you do whatever you want to do and life comes to an end and that's it, it's all over, boom, no, nothing. And then there were people who said what you do in this life affects the next life, and you know you can have a better rebirth based on what you've done, and so on. And so that was kind of their first question: is what about that? So the Buddha kind of comes back to answering that, and he says, if there is a world after death, if there is the fruit of actions rightly and wrongly done, then based on this practice, on cultivating and developing these mental states, then after death, I will reappear in a good destination in the heavenly world. So he's not saying that, you know, that there is a rebirth or anything like that. He says, if there is, and if what you do in this world, good or bad, determines what happens, then if you practice these, if you develop this ability to be loving and kind and accepting and grateful, then based on that when you die, when you reappear, you'll be in a better destination. Do a good thing, get a good result. So that's how that works. And then he says, well, look, if there's no world after death, if this is really it, if there's no fruit of my actions, and you know, there would be people who would say, well, you know, if this is it, then, you know, so what? Why would I need to do any of that? Because if there's no fruit of actions, then here in the present life, I will look after myself with ease, free from hostility, free from ill will, free from trouble. In other words, if there's no rebirth, and this comes up a lot, and one of the reasons I like this particular discourse, and I talk about this discourse, is that a lot of times people come in and go, well, I like Buddhism, but do I have to believe in reincarnation? Well, no, you don't. Because there is a way, if you practice this from a strictly humanistic standpoint, you will still get the benefits of the practice. You're still going to find yourself freer, I won't say free, but freer from hostility, freer from ill will, and less troubled, right? If you work with this, you're going to live a happier life. And then he says, if evil is done through acting, still I have willed no evil for anyone. Having done no evil action, from where will suffering touch me? So basically he's saying, you know, in other words, if evil is done through action, if there's a relationship between evil and karma, the fact that I haven't willed any evil for anyone, I'm not going to experience an evil result, right? The law of karma. Do a good thing, you get a good result. Do a bad thing, you get a bad result. So because I'm not doing any willful bad actions, I'm not going to get a bad result. And then he says, but if no evil is done through action, in other words, if there's no repercussions based on negative karma, then I still assume myself pure in both respects. In other words, okay, so I didn't do anything bad, I'm not going to get a bad result. If I did something bad, I wouldn't get a bad result. I still don't get a bad result either way. So I have hedged my bets. If nothing else, I have hedged my bets. And, you know, he could have gone on to say, look, you know, we live in the world that we create. And I think that he would have said that, you know. And so if we're not creating a world where we're not putting a lot of evil back there, we're not going to get a lot of evil back in this life either. It doesn't mean that we're not going to experience anything negative that happened, not as a result of our actions, but less, a little less evil world. As I'm thinking about this, I'm remembering back to when I first started working with Metta Bhavana, and I was I was at a department store and I was buying something, and the person checking me out was just really kind of rude and short with me. And that used to be a real trigger thing for me. Some of you have heard this story or similar one from me before. And so I would, somebody, if a rude salesperson, I had to deal with them, it would really tick me off. And I would do something like that sometimes. But as I said, I've been working with Metta Bhavana a lot. And so this young woman was ringing me up and she was being just kind of very curt. And I started to get annoyed. And then this idea would come up of wanting her to be happy. And I started feeling really friendly toward her, even though she wasn't acting friendly toward me, right? And so, she got finished and I wished her a good day and things like that. I was just friendly to her. And she smiled, right? I could have been a jerk, but at that particular moment, I decided not to do that, and I was feeling some good. We'll never know, but if I had been rude in return, she might have continued to be rude to people all day. Being kind to her, maybe she wasn't, or it wasn't as rude. At least I didn't put out something that was going to ripple and get bigger and bigger. So there's this idea in Christianity and in other religions that God and love are kind of the same. I think somewhere so look, I'm not a Christian, we're Jewish. It was my tradition a long, long time ago, but I'm not an expert on this kind of stuff at all. But there's this thing, God is love. And Merton said, to say that I'm made in the image of God is to say that love is the reason for my existence, for God is love. And love is my true identity. Selflessness is my true self. Love is my true character. Love is my name. And that's really beautiful, but what does it mean? And it's interesting. I have a meditation student who calls me once a week or so, and we talk about what's going on. And he's a physician, and so I was talking to him this morning, and I always do some sort of guided meditation when we talk, and so I thought, this is a good time with everything that's going on in the world to practice cultivating goodwill, metta bhavana. Bhavana means cultivation. Metta, we've talked about metta. And most of you have done this before, but in case you don't, the way you develop it is kind of the way the Buddha said, you send out this thought in all directions, may all beings be happy and well, or something along those lines. And you infuse all four directions and above and below with this idea, and that's how you develop that. So one way you can do that is in meditation. You start with yourself, may I be happy and well, and then think of a loved one, may they be happy and well, and then may my friends be happy and well, and then acquaintances be happy and well, and then people I'm not getting along with be happy and well, and finally everyone be happy and well, right? All beings be happy and well. And that's how you infuse this through all, to all beings in all directions, is by more and more expansively doing this. And so I was guiding him with this morning, and I had been thinking about this idea of the divine and this paragraph from Merton, that God says God is love. I was thinking, if you really experience that act of wishing for all beings that they be well and happy, then that really is kind of what Spong talks about, sort of making this assumption of divinity and then stepping into it. I think that's kind of how you could do that, and so I started working with it myself while I was guiding him. Sometimes when I do guided meditations, part of me has to kind of think about what I'm going to say next, but part of me is sort of meditating out loud, right? And so I started kind of thinking about it that way, and it really shifted the way I was experiencing that meditation, which I've done for decades. But it kind of changed the way I saw things this morning. A little bit of an epiphany there that I'll work with more and share with you more in the future. But anyway, so the way the Buddha taught this is not, well, here's the laws of the universe, and here's who decides what's right and wrong, and here's what you got to follow. He said, do this, and then you'll get a good result from this. Whatever the result is. And I think if we do that, if we encourage ourselves to develop this kindness toward others, even though a lot of us are really isolated from other people right now, which I'm kind of feeling. If we're doing this, we're still recognizing that we are a part of this ocean. When I do the incense offering, I talk about the bodhisattvas in the great pure ocean. What is this ocean? Right? This ocean is the result of our loving actions. And so if we're assuming Buddha nature, if we're wanting enlightenment for the sake of all beings and all that, we can really kind of make that an assumption and then walk into that assumption. And I think it will result in our experiencing the divine without having to decide what that means or which version of the divine is the true one or anything like that. Make the decision that this is what it means to be divine, and then step into that. So anyway, that's pretty much what I wanted to talk to you about this morning, and that wraps up the Kalama Sutta. I hope that you find that helpful, and discourse up. It's on Access to Insight and probably other places as well, and read that for yourself. So looks like somebody has asked a question, but I'm not sure. I'm going to take a look and see. Whoops. What did I just do? Oh. So Ellen asks, please discuss enlightenment. I'm not sure what it is. I'm not sure what it is either. It kind of depends on what angle you're looking at. But so I talked about it in terms of Dogen's saying that once you found enlightenment, everything is enlightened. Or maybe that was Suzuki. I don't remember. Anyway, some famous Zen writer said that. I think. So when we talk about enlightenment in terms of the Pali Canon, so when I talk about discourses like the Metta Sutta, and some of those, I use the word enlightened sometimes when I really mean arahant. An arahant is a person who has completely transcended the cycle of coming and going, and so become completely purified from any attachments that bring you back to suffering. So that's one thing. And there are actually stages of the path, and all of those stages you could kind of say are awakenings, enlightenings. So enlightened, awakened, kind of the same thing. The Buddha was awake. That's what Buddha means awake. And so what you awaken to, and he awakened to the truth of suffering and how to end suffering and the path to the end of suffering, right? And so awakened to an understanding that freed him from the cycle of coming and going, from samsara, from being born and dying. So when you go to Mahayana Buddhism, the emphasis shifts a little bit because you're not so concerned about being an arahant. Ellen is typing ha ha ha. So which is good because I said I don't know what it is either, and now I'm answering the question anyway. But anyway, you're not really that caught up in that, right? So it's more kind of stages of awakening, and so you would say you could still become enlightened, but not be an arahant, right? Not be enlightened in the way the Buddha was enlightened. but you have touched understanding in a way that is a little bit beyond conventional understanding. So I can explain to you what enlightenment is, and then you could go off and say, well, Sensei Morris said these 10 things. That doesn't make you enlightened. I can tell you what enlightenment is to me, you know, and what I've experienced, but that doesn't make you enlightened either, right? So it is difficult to put into words, and best not put into words what it is. I'd rather talk about what you do. There's a discourse in the Pali Canon called the 7 factors of enlightenment, and I'll give a Dharma talk about that sometime soon. It's a very interesting subject, and basically what it says is enlightenment is what you do. It's how you live, right? And I'm not going to go into it all now, but it's things like living mindfully and concentration and understanding what the Dharma means to me and how I live my life. But you could say, you know, that when you go for refuge to the Buddha, when you go for refuge to the Dharma and the Sangha, when you take the precepts, when you try to live by the precepts, that is enlightenment. And to make this a little bit more technical, maybe, Dogen, the founder of Soto Zen, said that Buddha nature was your practice. So enlightenment is your practice. If you're doing enlightened things, then that is enlightenment. That's not really the answer most people are looking for. Most people want, you know, well, the sky opens up and you know, a ray of light shines down from the heavens, and you suddenly got it all figured out. But that's really not it. There's a story which I've probably told recently, but I don't remember if it was on a Sunday morning, about this you know, young Zen monk whose teacher felt that he was right on the verge of an awakening, of an enlightenment experience, and so, but he just couldn't quite get there. So his teacher said, look, once you go up to the mountaintop, the mountain behind the monastery, go up to the top of the mountain and sit there and stay there until you wake up. And so the monk does as he's told, and he heads off, and there's a long, narrow path up the side of the mountain. He's going up the long, narrow path up the side of the mountain, and he gets to a certain point, and there's somebody coming down the mountain the other direction with a bundle of sticks on his shoulder. Woodman, you know, got a bundle of firewood on his shoulder. And so they kind of have to jockey around each other, and they both sort of decide it's a good time to sit down and rest. And so they sit down on this kind of stone ledge, and they're just kind of talking, and the woodsman says, what are you doing? And he says, well, you know, going up to the mountaintop to get enlightened. And the woodman goes, oh, good for you. So they rest and they chat, and they get up to leave, and the monk says to the woodman, says, by the way, what do you think of this enlightenment thing anyway? Well, it happens that this woodman was actually a bodhisattva who had, you know, taken this form at this moment in order to wake this monk up, right? And so he just drops his sticks, and they scatter on the path. And at that moment, this monk woke up. Okay, so what does that mean? I don't know. Let go of the things that you need to let go of that are keeping you from getting where you want to get, right? So one of the factors of enlightenment is to be able to let go of the things that are keeping you from seeing your true nature, keeping you from seeing the divine, if we want to put it into the terms that I've just been talking about. You know, what connects you to that which is greater than you, you know, this ground of being that is, you know, what will awaken you to that. Let go of those things that are blocking that view. And so that's what he does. He drops his sticks, boom, they scatter. And the monk is awake. And they kind of stand there staring at each other for a minute. And the monk goes, what now? And the woodman picks up his sticks, puts them on his shoulder, and heads off down the path, right? So this is what we do. We live an enlightened life, and we keep heading on with our lives. So anyway, that's, yeah. So that's a good way of looking at enlightenment. Are there any other questions? Okay. That's all the questions I see. Buddha nature pervades the whole universe, existing right here now, and offering flowers, candles, and incense, hearing the Dharma and training the mind. Great merit is attained. We dedicate this merit to the great Master Shakyamuni Buddha, the all-pervading and everlasting three treasures, the 16 guardians and all protectors of the Dharma, and their relations throughout space and time, to all ancestors of this Sangha and all beings in the Dharma world. May penetrating light dispel the darkness of ignorance, so that all karma be resolved and the mind flower bloom in eternal spring. May the Dharma body maintain strength and health, and years of life be lengthened for all teachers of this Sangha. May their vows be fully realized, and may they live in perfect peace with Buddha Dharma. We pray for all those suffering from violence and those who grieve for them, for all those living in oppression, for all who are imprisoned who should be free, and for all refugees from violence, hunger, and catastrophe, man-made or natural. We pray for the health and well-being of all those suffering from diseases of body, mind, or spirit, those working toward the healing of those afflictions. We pray for those suffering from COVID-19 and those working to protect them and treat them, and to those grieving for those lost to this pandemic. May they all be serene through all their troubles, and may we realize the enlightened way together. All Buddhas throughout space and time, all Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Mahapranya Paramita. Thank you. See you Wednesday.